Afternoon all, I thought we could carry on looking at some more Carlsen games, and they were mostly draws. He had 2 wins in the Tal Memorial, but he was in the strongest company in the world, imaginable basically, one of the strongest tournaments, the Tal Memorial of the year, and this is against the young Caruana, who's 2770. So let's have a look at this game. Magnus playing white, kicked off with d4. These are the approximate relay times from the ICC, by the way. There is a big advantage in using this ICC interface. You get more of a realistic model of the game and the time pressure elements. Chess is a game after all, you know, especially with the clock pressure ticking away. So we get a Gruenfeld defense, which personally I hate playing against the Gruenfeld. C takes d5 is arguably the strongest move in the position and the most popular as well. So now e4 again, the strongest move arguably and the most popular, the most trodden path of the Gruenfeld. So white has constructed this centre, and black usually tries to destroy that centre with moves like bishop g7, c5, knight c6, and often later pinning the knight, and so you get a barrage of pressure on d4, and it's not the sort of position which, if you don't like protecting your centre, you know, you might not like that kind of game. Now this is a really unusual check on move 7, surprise move already. What is this check? Okay, apparently it has been tried before with some success. I think the idea is to cause some disruption or a move that black doesn't really want to play. So he plays knight bd7, and now we see knight f3. So already, really, just with this check, you know, this looks quite a lot different to normal Gruenfeld lines. Before we go on now, let's have a look. If black had played, say, bishop d7, then maybe, you know, the weakness of the last move can be used. Maybe queen b3 is annoying. Possibly. So that could be annoying. And c6, you might think, but black really wants to play c5 at some point to put pressure on the centre. There will be no pin if knight f3, bishop g4 against the queen. So, okay. And queen d7, of course, was another option. But let's go with the game continuation. So knight f3, bishop e3. Now c5, but without the knight on c6, there's less pressure on d4 here. So rook c1. The queen is kicked and it goes all the way back to d1. So the advantage Magnus has brought in this position is that the knight is not on c6, it's on b6. So less pressure than usual on d4. Amazing, a little subtlety like a queen a4 check has changed the position quite significantly. Bishop g4, so black is playing as though this is the standard kind of play on d4, on that d4 pawn. Bishop e2, but with that curious difference now, this knight on b6 rather than c6. Now black voluntarily gives up the light square bishop, and g takes, and this is not the first time in this tournament that Magnus will play g takes f3. So what is the idea of that? He's leaving the bishop on this diagonal, so that cuts across knight c4 moves for black, rules them out for the moment. Okay, and maybe in theory there'll be pressure here, but it looks quite solid, black's king position. I think the main intention is not to have to waste time with the bishop later to protect c4. So c takes, queen d7. And that already exposes perhaps a vulnerability that this pawn is not protecting the h3 square. And what about these other moves which are made available by this knight? The knight is also on a4, and maybe, you know, black can try c4 anyway, but at the moment c4 is under lock and key from 2 pieces. Okay. Magnus castles, rook c8. And then we see queen d2. Okay, queen d2. So the centre looks fairly stable. c4 is under control, but you know, has black got potentially useful moves like Queen A4, or even Queen H3, or does the black queen want to remain flexible at the moment on D7? We'll see. Rook Fd8, so just putting more pressure on D4. And Magnus defends. A pair of rooks come off. Now Rook C8. Queen A3, putting pressure on A7. Okay. If the knight was on C6, of course it would have been protecting A7. The queen's also eyeing E7 here. Knight A4. Okay, that introduces also knight C3 and perhaps rook C3. Or just the idea of B5 is possible because the queen is supporting B5 as well. Bishop F1. And now we see B5, so just blocking up that A file. Black has a 2-to-1 pawn majority here, and he has a seemingly comfortable usage of the C file. Magnus has, though, the two bishops, and this light square bishop could be dangerous later on. Rook C1, another pair of rooks come off, and offering a pawn in the process, the D4 pawn. But B5 is loose in this transaction, and it's immediately taken here. The queen, if it takes, bishop takes D4, or maybe even Queen C8 check could be useful first, then bishop takes D4 will be check. Bishop takes E3, so we now get queens coming off, and you might think, why have I chosen this game to show you? Well, the draws, I think, are not going to be covered on YouTube much, because YouTube channels usually pick games which have an element of excitement to them, and this sort of game one normally wouldn't choose, except if it was in a World Championship context because of the profile of the game. But I still think, nevertheless, there are really interesting aspects of these draws, actually. We'll just follow the game to its conclusion. So Magnus took his other pawn off a dark square, and now actually he seemed content just to move his king backwards and forwards, and so did black with the bishop, and here they agreed a draw. It's difficult for either side to win because it's opposite coloured bishops. The pawn structure over here is identical, but here, okay, white's got double pawns, but it's not of major significance. If the king ever sort of leaves to go over, then F2 might be a target, a dark square target for this bishop later, like this. So the king maybe is content to be over here for the moment. So here they agreed a draw. Okay, it's not the most interesting game, but there's an interesting idea, a sort of anti-Gruenfeld system idea, that the normal logical pattern was disrupted in the Gruenfeld, which is intense pressure on D4 by this check, this pesky check move, Queen A4. That's the slight fascination I have with this game, and I just generally think it was an amazing achievement that Magnus has this ability to have very, very few losses, and so the wins he does get puts him still in the running for either winning a tournament or coming, high up. So okay, Caruana didn't make a dent. And okay, the opening knight d7, Caruana was content with a compromised knight on b6 instead of c6. But other moves don't look that great either. I mean, if the queen went to d7, we're disrupting the plan of bishop g4 later. So maybe, a move like queen b3, and then the white can play knight f3 later without worrying about any pin on bishop g4 against the queen. So it's an interesting idea. It's a disruptive idea, this queen a4 check. So the compromise of the knight being on b6 rather than c6, for those into the Gruenfeld, they might think you might think this is fascinating. This difference of position, this knight being on b6 rather than c6. Okay, taking like this did keep control of c4, which is often a vulnerability actually on the whites of a Gruenfeld. And okay, we have some rooks coming off shortly, and this a file blocked with knight a4. So c3 looks a bit vulnerable, and that's now kind of after b5, it's an invitation to do something like this because of that b5 being loose. If a6, there isn't really enough time maybe for a6 here because of, you know, taking it, and then maybe queen takes e7 possibly. That looks to be a clear pawn up. So black is forced into a committal decision, which is a little bit actually like the Kramnik game we saw, because actually Kramnik was kind of, after he sacrificed place, it was a committal path the game took. Turn of events. Here, this is a very committal path after rook c1. What else does black actually do here in this position? He doesn't want to lose b5. There's an immediate threat of rook takes and bishop takes b5, as well as the queen eyeing e7. So there's not too many choices. And here, I mean, okay, bishop takes d4. What else? What else does black do here? White now has that c file. If white is allowed to play something like d5, then I'm not really sure about this 2-to-1 pawn majority being useful. Let's say a6 d5. This might be in white's favour. There's an immediate idea of queen c6, for example, a very dangerous passed pawn might be on the cards. Or maybe with bishop f4 first, inserted first, then queen c6, it could start to look very dangerous. So, okay, Caruana went for that d4 pawn, and we got more simplification and an opposite coloured bishop ending. Again, I reiterate, it's not an entirely fascinating game, but there is some element of interest in it, especially for the Gruenfeld exponents out there. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.